are these people?
This is an extra story that we're going to do first because it applies to me. This will probably be more like a Collin's Rants. Those of you who've been around long enough, that was a weekly segment that I would do where I just rant on random mess politically. Probably usually the top story of the week. But this will be kind of that equivalent where those of you who are in the DC area might know that over the weekend, not Democrats, I wish, Republican Party did some shenanigans where they're basically fucking up DC funding to where there's a projected government shutdown by the end of the week. And if our money, essentially DC's money, is not resolved in terms of, not using it in a way that it's like in a way that we've budgeted this said money, then there's a possibility that I might be furloughed. And it's not just me, but other DC-based organizations might also be furloughed, or that. And I say that that might be the best case scenario in this case. So here's a local news report that kind of explains more of what's going on and how this affects me directly. So we'll watch that clip and we'll talk a little more about it because I do have some thoughts.
Let's go ahead and take you back to that budget battle on Capitol Hill and specifically how it could impact us here in D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser spoke on.
No. I can fix that. Hold on. This is what happens when I don't flip-flop things. I didn't flip-floppy the thing. No. Here you go.
Capitol Hill. Let's go ahead and take you back to that budget battle on Capitol Hill and specifically how it could impact us here in D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser spoke on Capitol Hill to lawmakers, and here's what she had to say about it.
But we are not a federal agency. The District of Columbia raises and spends its own money just like every other state. It focuses on three main areas: public safety, public education, and economic growth. Disrupting those investments won't be good for DC or our country.
Bill passes, it could lead to $1 billion in cuts specifically for the district's budget. Our Rafael Sanchez Cruz is joining us live on the Hill. Rafa, you listened to the mayor speak. What do we need to know?
Yeah, Simone, well, I would just want to touch on some highlights that she mentioned. She is in conversations with the White House and also Speaker Mike Johnson regarding the impacts that this would have on D.C. residents. Now, D.C. officials are scrambling tonight. We were told that the chief financial officer has had multiple meetings today, emergency meetings to discuss this. They're really trying to determine where they can make the cuts. And this is, of course, blindsided a lot of our D.C. leaders. So, we've seen the D.C. Council here today, that Mayor Muriel Bowser, and of course our delegate in Congress, DC's delegate in Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, all together with a unifying message. And earlier today, I want to show you some of the images. We followed 5 council members as they tried to meet with House Speaker Mike Johnson. They requested a 2-minute meeting with one of his staffers, but were denied. Of course, they did not have a meeting set up today. So let's break down what this really means to DC residents. So we've already 6 months into the fiscal year for 2025, and that budget has already been authorized. But if this stopgap federal spending bill moves forward as is, DC would be treated as a federal agency and would have to go back to 2024 budget spending. That means city officials would have to make $1 billion in cuts. The DC Council says that would translate in mass furloughs and direct impacts to DC residents. Chairman Phil Mendelson spoke to us about those impacts. Let's hear what he had to say.
If we were to have to reduce our spending by $1 billion, there's no question that we would have to reduce law enforcement, we would have to reduce all aspects of public safety, we would have to cut teachers, we would have to cut homeless services programs, all the kinds of things that actually many of these Republicans have been talking about, public safety and cleanliness of the city. We are not a federal agency. We operate like a state. We raise our own revenue. We are not funded by the federal government.
Now, like I mentioned, DC's delegate in Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, she's introduced an amendment to actually stop the impact on DC residents. That amendment is actually being discussed in a meeting that started just a couple minutes ago by the Rules Committee here in the House. So there is some hope. But, you know, we asked Mayor Muriel Bowser and several DC leaders if they thought this was an intentional overreach of power. And they essentially said they hope that it's a mistake and that they're able to see some type of change so that these impacts don't go into effect. Again, time is ticking, but there are going to be some moving parts in the next couple minutes and hours. We'll, of course, have updates coming up at 5 and 6 to see how this moves forward here on Capitol Hill. I'm Rafael Sanchez Cruz. Back to you, Simone.
If it's not a mistake, it's hard to see how it could be anything over than an overreach, with D.C. Police Department set to lose $67 million, D.C. Public Schools $192 million. Rafa, thanks for breaking that down for us. We'll check in with you for updates as soon as you have them.
Well,
so let me break this down so it makes sense to you guys. So basically, I live in DC. DC is a federal district. Our funding in order to essentially run our essential services, most of that money is garnered by taxpayer dollars. So my taxpayer dollars, as well as taxpayer dollars of all DC residents, essentially help our city in terms of its essential services. Republicans, as I said, there is a government shutdown that is going to occur on Friday. What the Republicans are trying to do is remove a provision that essentially says that we run like a state. So basically, all the money, our taxpayer money, and all these essential services, you know, are being taken care of. The budget that we have has already been approved by Congress already. So, because any budget that we pass every year, and this is some of the things that I work on, well, kind of advocate for in terms of how should we use our money, you know, where should it be going, especially in dealing with education. These are the things in my advocacy group that I work directly with. Sometimes, depending on the thing, we may not get funding for certain programs in education. Some might get about the same, others might get a little bit more. It depends on the budget. What the Republicans are trying to do in order to prevent a government shutdown, they're saying that we are a federal agency, meaning DC is acting like the federal government, that the money that that is being said that we need in order to run the city, we need to cut. Keep in mind, as I said, this budget has already been approved by Congress. So now they're saying, and now we're 6 months in the year, they're basically saying you need to cut $1 billion from your budget immediately if this passes. So the provision that essentially protects us has been removed from this resolution. So if this is not resolved by Friday at midnight, for all intents and purposes, and I don't even know what this will look like for me personally, but there is a strong possibility that if not me, then teachers in DC, cops, mental services, other service, essentially main services, will be furloughed. So work without pay. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So right now, the sad thing is, given what I've kind of been seeing online and kind of in chats that I've seen in certain groups during the day, per usual, most of our politicians do not know that this provision has been removed, because it's the idea of, oh, we have to keep the government running. So, but of course, in these bloated bills, there's always a catch that most politicians do not read. They're not realizing that, if in order to keep the government open, there's this provision within for DC that is missing that will affect DC workers. So that's where we're at right now in a matter of speaking. So
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm just I'm still curious how. I mean, that you can't shut down the entire like city of DC. You know, I imagine some deals will be worked out. You know, but
Well, yes, but again, this is kind of why, and we've talked about this before. This is why, when it comes to policy making, especially when it comes to all these bills, you need to be extra careful, because usually, and we talked about this before, usually a lot of these bills that they want to pass are like reams long. Like,
yeah,
they're not going to have the time to read through all of that. So more often than not, it's just the idea of just talking about the main bullet points, but may omit the shit that might occur if it passes or not. So that's kind of what's happening here. But this is under the guise of keeping the government open. So right now, Democrats are kind of like, well, the government has to stay open, so I have to say yes to this resolution.
yeah,
But not understanding that in doing that, that affects me.
right.
And it affects DC workers. So that's what we're trying to make clear to them. Well, it passed the House,
Yeah,
of course. So right now it's going through the Senate within the next 24 hours.
which Republicans control as well. So
Right, but they need a filibuster. So they need several
Filibuster proof.
Democrats to
Yeah.
filibuster proof. So they need, and I forgot the numbers in the Senate right now, but they will need Democrats in order to have this pass. So while I would say it wouldn't be likely, I'm also kind of skeptical, because again, if they're not aware of what's in the bill, then
Yeah.
it's very easy for them to say, yes, we'll pass it. So that's what we're finding and trying to make noise about, right now. So yeah, so right now I'm kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen. And even like in this, if it passes, we don't entirely know how this will go down immediately. Just talking, it's just very nebulous as in terms of what will happen to me and others in the city specifically if this does get voted through. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now. But I did want to share this story because, number one, I find it kind of interesting that, and let me know if the chat if you heard about this at all, but I don't think it's getting national news, which you think it would, considering this is a government shutdown situation, which normally does. So the idea that even if mainstream media or national news is talking about this, but omitting this bit, I think is kind of sus, in my opinion. But more importantly right now is the idea, and this is kind of why, well, even earlier tonight, I was in several meetings just talking about, well, how do we get our politicians' attention to this matter? What should people be doing? And like, all this kind of stuff. And there was just a lot of talk regarding, now this is in a union meeting, because I'm the building rep for my school, in reference to our union. There was just kind of a lot of talk of, like, we have to be careful in how we organize and how we elevate this issue, because if we're not careful, then the Republicans will use that for their own nefarious purposes and make us look bad and blah, 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 blah. And that whole thing just kind of reminds me of what Kwame Ture said, you know, in terms of organizing, just the idea of like, if you're going, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but the idea of you're assuming that your enemy has a conscience. And in this case, the Republicans have no conscience. So why are we worried about appearances of what we look like to them when they're playing dirty? Now, I'm not saying that obviously to play dirty in the same way as they do, but in my opinion, it was, the talk was more about being civil and being almost nice. And I'm kind of like, and thank God there's other people in the room that was kind of on the same wavelength as I was. But like, when has being nice, especially in terms of being more like, especially talking with Democrats, when has that ever, how's that worked? You know, for us, like,
Yeah.
obviously we can't necessarily go in guns blazing, but there needs to be some type of
You could.
aggression on our end
You
to
know.
kind of show, like, well, especially from the Democrats, you know, and this is kind of what we're seeing, or the lack of what we're seeing right now from them. Like, where's your stand in any of this? Not just this, but any issue right now where you're trying to form the quote
I'll tell you why
resistance.
they're not. I'll tell you why they're not. So there's this thing, and I've seen it around a few times, where they're hoping it gets so bad that default you'll vote Democrat in the next election. So they're willing to let it fucking burn. They're like, all right. It's like Pied Piper strategy times 1,000, essentially. And they don't care who the Republican is running next time. They just know it's not going to be a Democrat. And as my thing is that if you don't offer any resistance now, no one's going to think you're going to do it next time. So, you know, that idea of putting a Democrat in power to save things is not going to work out this time. So,
the talk in my union meeting was, oh, we have to do a rally, and there are a couple of rallies that are happening tomorrow, which, by the way, I can't do because I have conferences all day. Like, I'm meeting with families all day. So it's kind of like,
yeah, you're out of luck.
And like, you're asking, you're asking not to look. I've said this. I don't mind rallies, but even with rallies, it's like, what's its purpose? Because if you're not using rallies to garner like ways to organize, it's just a one-off, then what are we doing?
Yeah.
So well,
it's usually a photo op for whatever person wants to make it one. So
if it were a way to kind of get media attention regarding the story, I can go for that. But that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case here. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. So obviously I'm not in the best mood because I am worried about the situation regarding what could happen to me and what might happen to my colleagues. Just talking to them, they're saying it could look like our specialist service, like our specialists, like our art, music, science programs may be cut.
Yeah.
You know, from schools.
They're the first things usually.
They usually are the first things to go. Like someone like me who's in early childhood more likely would be fine. But that's still going to be a blow, you know, in terms of the learning that occurs.
For sure.
In our classrooms, for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll keep you updated on this. But yeah, but as we say, voting has consequences, and this is the result of choices that were made. And I'm not talking about you guys, but you know, honestly, I didn't think that I was going to be on this seat in terms of, you know, having it be this direct in terms
Yeah.
of my livelihood. But yeah, talking about this and other stories like this is why we're demonetized. So, for right now, I know some of you are asking, will you be okay? The answer is I don't know. I'm going to be very transparent. I don't know. For now, I'm okay. But right now, as I keep saying, I want you to take care of yourselves. That being said, if you want to help the network and us, you can scan the QR code that you see at the bottom of your screen, or you can go to the Ko-fi link that you see in the bottom there. And if you want to donate that way, you can. We definitely will appreciate it. If you want to help us just in terms of helping us with the algorithm, the best way you can do that is like, share, and subscribe to our content. And let us know in the comments, have you seen national media report on what's happening in DC at all? Were you aware of the government shutdown that's going to occur on Friday if this is not averted? And yeah, I just want to say, especially given that the Department of Ed has been cut in half today. Do you know anyone personally who has been affected by, the cuts that the Trump administration is doing right now? So let us know in the comments. And thank you guys for watching. Thank you. We love you and appreciate you.
Yay.